My little granddaughter warned me about her father, but nothing prepared me for what I found in his phone. I had lived in my son's house for 3 years, though he never called it my home. Bryce liked to remind me that every wall, floorboard, and light bulb belonged to him and Tanya, even though half the renovations had been paid for with my savings when I first moved in. I was nearing 70, and the body keeps score. My knees had stiffened from years of nursing shifts, and my blood sugar needed strict medication. Still, every morning I shuffled to the kitchen, trying not to bother anyone, which never worked. Bryce would glare at me over his coffee and say, "You eat more than you're worth, Mom. You're a walking bill, not family." That was how my day began, with the man I once carried on my back calling me an expense. Tanya kept her disgust sharp and open, tossing a towel toward me and saying, "Wipe the counters, Eleanor. That's the only thing those shaky hands won't ruin." She never used my name kindly, only as a weapon, and Bryce followed her lead. They referred to me as her or that woman, as though saying, "Mom might stain their tongues." I tried to earn my place. I folded laundry even when my fingers cramped and watched little Tessa after school so they would not have to pay a sitter. Tanya twisted everything into an accusation. She rearranged my kitchen again. She thinks she lives here. They even banned me from opening the fridge after 9, with Tanya snapping, "If she snacks at night and dies in her sleep, I'm not taking the fall for her stupidity." They spoke as though my life were an inconvenience and my survival optional. Bryce's resentment festered from old wounds he carved himself. Years ago, he begged to use the Ridgway family home as collateral for a gambling loan, and I refused. I had worked decades to keep that house from foreclosure after his father died, but Bryce said, "You ruined my chance to flip my life around." Tanya despised me for teaching Tessa to save her allowance instead of buying toys she did not need. She claimed I was poisoning the child with a poor mindset. They mocked my years of nursing, calling it a low-class job, while still spending my retirement checks and prescription reimbursements. They drained me, then accused me of being a parasite. The only light in that house was Tessa. She would run to me after school, throw her arms around my waist, and whisper, "I love you, Grandma. You're the only one who listens to me." Bryce hated it. He would snap, "Do not make her soft like you. The world eats people like you." But Tessa clung tighter when he said it, as if she already sensed something I kept trying not to see. Around 200 words ago, you may have felt the same tightening fear I lived with each day, and if you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. One night, long after they thought Tessa was asleep, I heard Bryce's voice drifting from the kitchen. His tone was low, practical, frightening in its calm. "Once she doesn't wake up, things will finally be easier." It was not said in anger. It was said like a man discussing trash pickup. Tanya murmured something I could not hear, and Bryce responded, "It's not like anyone will question it. She's old. Things happen." My chest tightened as though invisible hands were pushing against my ribs. I had lived through 1,000 unkind words, but this was different. This was a plan. I stayed frozen in the hallway until I heard a soft thud upstairs. Small feet hurried across the floor. A door creaked open. A moment later, Tessa slipped into my room with her teddy bear clutched to her chest. Her voice trembled. "Grandma, Daddy said you won't wake up one morning." He said it like it's already decided. My heart dropped so hard it felt like it hit the mattress. I pulled her into my arms and told her everything was fine, even though the cold spreading through my spine told me nothing was fine. She pressed her face against my shoulder, shaking, and I held her as tightly as my stiff arms allowed. I knew that children often misunderstand adult conversations, but this time there was no misunderstanding. I could hear the echo of Bryce's words in her fear. While she trembled, something inside me shifted. It was not anger yet. It was recognition. I had overlooked 1,000 small cruelties, told myself that exhaustion made them harsh, that stress made them cruel. But children do not invent terror, and Tessa was terrified. I stroked her hair and whispered a lie meant to protect her, not myself. Grandma is not going anywhere, sweetheart. But in the dark I felt the truth settle like a stone in my stomach. My own son was planning a world where I no longer existed, and the only person brave enough to warn me was a little girl who loved me more than he ever had. People like to say time softens old wounds, but mine never had the chance. They were kept open, poked, and paraded as flaws whenever Bryce needed someone to blame. My past was supposed to be a story of survival, but in his mouth, it became an accusation he never stopped sharpening. When I was young, I buried my husband before Bryce turned 6. I worked night shifts at the nursing home, then morning shifts at the clinic when bills piled up. I held the hands of strangers as they forgot their own names, then came home to a little boy who only remembered that his mother was too tired to play. Once, when Bryce was burning with fever and we did not have enough money for a taxi, I lifted him onto my back and walked through sleet to the nearest urgent care. My shoes were ruined, my uniform soaked, and I still had another shift waiting. He never remembered the effort, only the part where we arrived late. As he grew older, his grades were mediocre, but he insisted it was because I had not provided a better environment. I watched my pennies and skipped meals so he could have school supplies, but he called me the reason he grew up poor. I lived frugally because I had to. He lived recklessly because he refused to accept limits, and somehow my discipline was an offense in his eyes. When Tanya appeared, she was polite at first, soft-spoken enough to fool me into believing she cared. After their wedding, she shed the sweetness like a discarded coat and made her opinion clear. She walks around like she owns the place and old people, she whispered to Bryce when she thought I was too far to hear. Not exactly the mother-in-law I wanted. But the deepest crack between us came from the old Ridgeway house, the one my grandparents left me. It stood a few towns away, worn but sturdy, the only safety net I had for my old age. Bryce wanted it not to live in, but to use as collateral for another one of his get-rich-quick schemes. When I told him no, he acted as if I had condemned him. "You'd rather trust dead people than your own son," he shouted. I tried to explain it was the only thing I had left to retire on, that I had spent my life giving him everything else. But he turned my caution into betrayal. From that moment on, resentment became his second skin. The cruelty escalated with an audience. During a neighborhood barbecue last summer, I stood quietly near the grill holding a bowl of salad when Bryce announced loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mom's just staying with us until she remembers she belongs in a nursing home." A few people chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether it was a joke. Tanya added, "She won't sign over that old house because she thinks we'll dump her." "Maybe we should, just so we don't disappoint her." Laughter came more easily at that, embarrassed but real. I felt my cheeks burn while I stood there, fingers trembling around the bowl. Not one person told him to stop. Not even Bryce himself noticed the way I shrank back as if someone had struck me. Shame is an old companion, but public shame is different. It burrows deeper. Over time, Bryce carved out more ways to erase me. He forbade me from taking Tessa to church, though it was where her grandfather and I had married. He told me to remove the photos of my late husband from my dresser because they dragged down the mood. He acted as though my memories contaminated his house. The truth was simpler and crueler. I reminded them of responsibility, of sacrifice, of everything they refused to be. I was a mirror they did not want to look into. All of it might have faded into painful routine, if not for what happened a few weeks before Tessa warned me. Bryce had bought a massive pickup truck he could not afford, and the loan payments nearly doubled his debt. One morning, after he spent half an hour ranting about bills, I gently suggested he sell the truck. Before I even finished the sentence, he spun around and shouted so loudly the windows rattled, "You don't get to talk about my finances. You've done enough damage. This is my house, my family, and you are just a long-term guest we haven't kicked out yet." He said it in front of Tessa, in front of 2 neighbors who had stopped by with mail. I felt every word strike like a slap. Tessa's eyes filled with tears, her small hands gripping her backpack as though she wished she could disappear into it. I tried to smile at her, but my face would not obey. In that moment, something in me cracked open, not from surprise, but from the confirmation of what I had feared for years. I was no longer a mother in his eyes. I was an obstacle he tolerated until he found a more convenient way to remove me. And weeks later, when Tessa crawled into my bed, whispering that her father said I would not wake up soon, that crack widened into something darker, something colder, something that told me my past had been twisted into a weapon, and my future, in their hands, was meant to vanish. The discovery began on an afternoon that should have been ordinary. Bryce had been drinking since lunch, knocking back cheap whiskey in the living room until his words slurred and his footsteps staggered. When he stood to go upstairs, his phone slipped from his pocket and hit the floor with a crack. He cursed at it, kicked it toward the wall, and lumbered up the stairs without picking it up. I stayed frozen where I was, not daring to touch anything of his. But before I could decide what to do, little Tessa tiptoed forward, eyes wide and frightened. She held the phone like it was something alive that might bite her. "Grandma," she whispered, "I think there's something bad in Daddy's phone. He said if you stay, they'll fix it." Her hands trembled as she pushed it toward me, as if she could not bear to be the one holding it any longer. I asked her what she meant, but she shook her head and curled closer to me, whispering, "Please look, I'm scared." My heart tightened. Snooping through someone's phone went against every boundary I was raised with, every rule I taught Bryce when he was little. But the fear in Tessa's eyes was not imagined. It was the fear of a child who had heard something she did not understand but instinctively knew was dangerous. My privacy, Bryce's privacy, whatever moral line stood between them, it all shrank beneath the simple truth. This might be the only chance to understand what they were planning. I unlocked the phone easily. Bryce never used a passcode when he was drinking. At first, nothing looked unusual. Messages, photos, banking apps. But then I saw a folder labeled 4CPS. My breath hitched. My thumb hovered over it as every part of me urged caution. Then I remembered Tessa's voice shaking as she begged me to look. I opened the folder. The first file was an audio recording. I pressed play. At first I heard my own voice, or something meant to sound like it. "Stop crying or it'll hit you." The words felt like a punch to my stomach. The tone was harsh, sharp, nothing like how I speak to Tessa. Another clip followed. "I'm tired of you. I should have left you." My hand flew to my mouth. They were fabrications, bad ones, if you listened closely, with awkward cuts, mismatched breaths, background noises that didn't belong to my kitchen. Dozens of files, each one slicing deeper than the last, each designed to sound like I was screaming at my granddaughter. It was a script of abuse that had never happened. They were planning to paint me as a threat. I felt the room tilt, but I forced myself to continue. In Bryce's messages with Tanya, the plan became clearer, uglier. "Once CPS sees the recordings, they'll force her into a facility," Bryce wrote. "Then we can take that house off her hands legally. For her own good." Tanya's reply was colder. "Well, say she forgets things, gets violent. Old people always look guilty on camera. Old people. As if age alone made me disposable. As if they could reshape reality simply by saying it out loud. But nothing prepared me for the next folder. Tessa practice. My fingers trembled as I clicked it. The first recording made my blood run cold. Tanya's voice, irritated and impatient. "Say, Grandma scared me." She yelled and grabbed me. "Come on, repeat it." Then Tessa's small voice, shaky and wet with tears. But Grandma didn't. A loud thump, maybe a hand on the table. Then Tanya again, voice hard as steel. "Do you want to stay with us, or go live with strangers? Say it right. If you don't say it right, Daddy will send you somewhere far away, and you won't get to see Grandma again. Do you understand? Now say it properly." Tessa sobbed louder. I felt something inside me break, a tearing sensation like the ripping of old fabric. I could barely breathe as I played the next file. Again and again, Tessa tried to defend me, and again Tanya cornered her emotionally, forcing her to rehearse lies she could barely speak through tears. My Tessa, my sweet girl who trusted me, was being used like a bargaining chip in a game I never agreed to play. The cruelty of it stunned me. This wasn't just about removing me. This was about erasing me from Tessa's life entirely, turning her against me so thoroughly that even the memory of my love would be questioned. I clutched the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. The sound of Tessa crying through the speaker was too much. Tears blurred my vision until the screen melted into streaks of light. I had survived many kinds of pain in my life, grief, exhaustion, humiliation, but this was different. This was watching my granddaughter's innocence being twisted into a weapon. This was hearing adults bully a child into betraying the one person who had never harmed her. My breath shook as I lowered the phone. Bryce and Tanya hadn't just wanted to force me out, they wanted to destroy the bond between me and the only person in that house who still loved me. They wanted to rewrite me as a monster so that when I screamed for help, no one would listen. They wanted me separated, silenced, committed, and stripped of everything I had left. And as the last recording ended with Tessa sobbing, barely able to get the words out, I felt the truth settle into place with terrifying clarity. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me erased. After hearing the recordings of Tessa being coached to lie, I should have stopped. My hands were shaking so hard the phone almost slipped from my grip, and my chest felt tight in a way I had not felt since the night my husband died. But something in me, maybe instinct, maybe fear, maybe the last spark of self-preservation told me there was more. People who build schemes as elaborate as Bryce and Tanias do not stop at one plan. They always prepare for the moment something goes wrong. I searched deeper into the phone. At the bottom of the file list was a folder with a name I didn't recognize, 2 random letters followed by numbers. A decoy, the kind people use when hiding things they don't want casual eyes to find. I opened it. The first thing I saw was a message thread between Bryce and Tanya. The text preview alone felt like ice on my skin. I opened the conversation. "She's diabetic," Bryce wrote. "1 heavy dose, she crashes in her sleep." Tanya's reply appeared instantly beneath it. "Well, say her sugar dropped because she was careless. Old people and their meds, right?" I felt my pulse thud in my throat. They weren't just planning an accusation. They were planning my death. And they were planning to disguise it as an accident. There were pictures attached, prescriptions, a doctor's note Bryce had clearly obtained by lying, claiming he needed extra insulin for emergency management because his elderly mother often forgot her doses. The handwriting didn't belong to our usual clinic doctor. Bryce had gone somewhere new, somewhere less suspicious, someone who didn't know my medical history well enough to question the request. The vials in the photo were full, labeled with my name. My name. I exhaled slowly, forcing air through lungs that felt too tight. Years of nursing had taught me exactly what an overdose of insulin would do. Hypoglycemia severe enough to mimic a heart attack, or a quiet slipping away in sleep, the kind of death people call peaceful, never knowing how quickly it comes or how easily it can be staged. I kept scrolling. There was a Word document. Last will, Eleanor R. Docs. My heart stuttered. I opened it. The will stated that I freely, and with full clarity of mind, left the Ridgeway house, my grandparents' house, to Bryce, in gratitude for his years of loving care. At the bottom was a scanned signature that looked like mine if you squinted, but the loops were wrong, and the R in Ridgeway was shaped like a child tracing letters they barely remembered. They hadn't even tried very hard to forge it. They assumed no one would examine it too closely. After all, who questions the will of an old woman who supposedly abused her granddaughter and grew unstable before her passing? My fingers went numb. Somewhere in my mind, something was screaming, but I kept going. Near the bottom of the folder was a thumbnail labeled Hallway Cam, 2 a.m. I had forgotten the house cameras were synced to Bryce's phone through the security app. I tapped the file. The video opened with night vision green casting grainy shadows across the hallway. There was my bedroom door, slightly ajar the way I always left it so I could hear Tessa if she needed anything. Then Bryce stepped into frame. He was holding something. A syringe. He lifted it to eye level, flicked it the way a nurse might before giving an injection, and whispered into his phone, "She's asleep. If Tessa wasn't stirring so much, it'd do it now." His voice was steady, not wavering, not doubting. Steady. Tanya's voice crackled faintly from his speaker. Tomorrow then. Just get it done, Bryce. I'm tired of breathing the same air as that relic. Relic. I watched the man I raised stand at my door with a needle intended to kill me, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. My knees buckled, and I had to sit on the edge of the bed before the weight in my chest knocked me over. For a moment, I nearly fainted. The world swayed, and lines blurred, and a sound escaped my throat that I didn't recognize as my own. But old habits saved me. Years of nursing had taught me how to breathe through panic, how to steady myself when others were collapsing, how to separate fear from action. I inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, and forced my mind to stay present. I replayed the clip, watching Bryce's silhouette again. My son, my only child, the little boy I once carried through sleet. He stood there calmly, waiting for the right moment to end my life. There was no misunderstanding left. This wasn't the cruelty of frustration or resentment. This wasn't even simple greed. This was a structured, deliberate, two-tier plan. Plan A. Kill me quietly with insulin and let the world assume it was a medical accident. Plan B. If something interfered, if I didn't die fast enough or questions arose, they would use doctored recordings, forced statements from Tessa, and a forged will to have me declared unfit, institutionalized, and stripped of my property. Two paths to the same outcome. Silence me, erase me, replace me with something valuable. I stared at the phone, at the needle in Bryce's hand, at the proof of the thing my heart had refused to believe, even when the signs were everywhere. This wasn't disrespectful. It wasn't ingratitude. It was an attempted murder. And for the first time in a very long time, my fear hardened into something else, something cold, steady, and unforgiving. They thought I was weak. They thought I was alone. They thought wrong. The night I watched Bryce standing outside my door with that syringe, I knew I could not survive this alone. Fear is a terrible companion. It whispers that you have no one, nothing, nowhere to turn. But somewhere deep inside me, under all the panic and betrayal, a name surfaced. I had not spoken it aloud in years. Frank Donovan, a retired detective now, but once a stubborn, sharp-eyed force of nature. I had cared for him after his accident a decade ago, when he shattered his femur trying to stop a burglary. I helped him walk again, listened to him talk about the cases that weighed on him, the crooked men who smiled like saints, the victims no one believed. One afternoon, when he realized I was the only person who treated him like a human being and not a broken badge, he told me quietly, "If you ever need someone to believe you when no one else does, call me." I never imagined I would. Still trembling, I found his number in an old journal and dialed. He answered on the second ring. His voice was older, gravelly, but still steady. "Eleanor, are you all right?" "No," I whispered, and my voice cracked in a way that told him everything. I sent him all of it, the edited audio files meant to frame me, the messages about CPS, the forged will, the folder outlining how they planned to overdose me, and the video of Bryce outside my door. I expected silence, maybe hesitation, maybe pity. But Frank breathed in sharply and said, with the calm of a man who had seen real evil, "Eleanor, this is attempted homicide, and it is not even subtle. I am coming to you." "No," I said quickly, "you cannot. If they see you," he understood before I finished. "Then we do this smart. You send me everything. I will start pulling strings from here." Within 20 minutes, he had begun digging. He had old contacts in law enforcement, people who still respected him. He used them like tools he had not forgotten how to hold. The first thing he uncovered was traffic camera footage. Bryce selling insulin and other prescription meds in a parking lot weeks ago. Bryce had been selling extra vials on the side to chip away at his gambling debt, unaware that every transaction left a digital trail that would later bury him. Not using them, selling them, that alone was a felony. Frank kept going. He checked medical records and, with a few favors called in, obtained the prescription logs. "Your son requested insulin 4 times in the last 6 months, he said, each time claiming you were unstable and losing control of your blood sugar. I cross-checked your actual pharmacy pickups. They do not match. He is stockpiling. My stomach twisted. Bryce was building an entire narrative. A fragile, old woman declining mentally and physically, a perfect candidate for a tragic medical accident. He thought of everything except that someone might look too closely. Eleanor, Frank said, his voice harder now. This is premeditated. They want the house, the benefits. And to erase you. I swallowed hard. Hearing someone else say it made it real in a way I was not prepared for. But Frank wasn't done. He dug through public database requests, insurance company logs, recorded service calls, and there it was. A call from Tanya last week. She had asked an insurance representative, in the sweetest fake voice she could muster, what happens if an elderly diabetic relative passes away in her sleep from complications. The timestamp made my skin crawl. They had been planning this long before they rehearsed their CPS lie. Frank exhaled sharply. They are building a multi-layered trap. But the good news is they are sloppy. Their arrogance will be their downfall. What do I do now? I asked, the question escaping before I could steady myself. We set the stage, he said, but you do not confront them. Not yet. He laid out the plan, methodically, like a map unfolding across the table. I would install a tiny camera in my room, tucked into a place they would never think to look. Frank sent me instructions for an app that automatically uploaded every recording to both him and the local police server. I would keep my door unlocked, not in surrender, but to give them the confidence they needed to make a mistake. And most important, Frank said, you act. You play the part they want you to play. You move a little slower, forget a word here and there, apologize for things you did not do, make them believe they are winning. I knew he was right. Cornered predators strike fast. Confident ones take their time. And time was what we needed to let their guilt grow so large it swallowed them. But in the quiet moments after we hung up, the weight of everything pressed on my chest. Part of me still wanted to believe there was a path where Bryce was misguided, influenced, twisted by stress, instead of malice. But then I remembered the needle in his hand, the forged will, the rehearsed lie they forced on Tessa, the way he spoke about my death as if it were a household chore. Whatever man I raised no longer lived in that house. What haunted the halls now was someone who wanted me gone. I touched the top of Tessa's head as she slept beside me that night. Her breath was warm, steady. She still trusted the world, trusted me, trusted the hope that goodness existed somewhere. If I stay silent, I whispered, brushing her hair back, you will be next. This was not about revenge for the insults, or the humiliation, or the abandonment. This was about saving the only innocent soul left in this house. And I would not fail her. Not again. The day they planned to kill me began with kindness forced, unnatural, shining like polished brass over rust. Bryce made breakfast without slamming pans. Tanya complimented my sweater, though she had called it thrift store trash the week before. They urged me to eat more, rest more, relax. Every gesture felt like bait laid carefully on a trap. Even the air in the house felt thinner, stretched tight, as if holding its breath for the end they believed was coming. Tessa sensed something wrong. She hovered beside me all afternoon, gripping my sleeve with small, anxious fingers, but every time she tried to speak, Bryce snapped. Bed. Now, she went reluctantly, turning back to me with wide, frightened eyes before disappearing into her room. I wanted to follow her, hold her, shield her from this nightmare she never asked to be part of, but the plan could not bend now. Frank was already in place. The police were waiting for the signal, and the camera, hidden in my nightstand, was quietly recording. All I had to do was survive the next few hours. When the house finally went quiet, I lay in bed, pretending to sleep, though my pulse hammered so loudly I feared they would hear it from the hallway. I kept one hand beneath the blanket, close to the panic button Frank had installed on a burner phone. One press would send the footage directly to the officers waiting outside, but Frank had insisted I wait until they made their move. Intent matters, Head said. Let them show it. Near midnight, the floorboard outside my room creaked. Slow, deliberate steps. A familiar shadow slid across the crack beneath the door. The knob twisted with a soft click. Bryce pushed the door open inch by inch, stopping only when the hinges sighed. Tanya stood behind him, outlined by the hallway light, arms crossed, eyes cold. "Do it," she whispered. "I'm done waiting for nature." Bryce exhaled, a long, shaky breath. "One stick," he murmured, lifting the syringe, and we're free. I kept my breathing steady, shallow enough to mimic sleep, but not so controlled it seemed unnatural. He stepped closer, the faint scent of cheap beer on his clothes. He leaned over me, fingers curling around my wrist as if I were nothing more than a limb to adjust. "Goodbye, dead weight," he muttered. The needle hovered above my skin. My heart pounded so violently I wondered if the mic would pick it up. The room felt impossibly small, the air colder than it should have been. I lay limp, waiting for the sting. The moment the metal pierced flesh, the moment my life would depend on how quickly the officers moved. Then it happened. The tip of the needle brushed my arm, and the door exploded open. "Drop the syringe, hands where we can see them." Lights flooded the room. Boots pounded the floor. Bryce recoiled, the syringe clattering against the hardwood. Tanya screamed something incoherent and backed into the wall as two deputies rushed in, guns raised. Bryce stammered. "This is medicine. I was helping her. She needed it, you don't understand." Tanya jabbed a finger toward me, panicked and shrill. "She wanted to die. She begged us. We were respecting her wishes." But Frank stepped into the doorway, his expression carved from stone. He held up his phone and pressed play. Bryce's own voice filled the room. "Once she dies, we sell her house. Split the money." Another clip followed Bryce outside my bedroom door the night before, syringe in hand. The color drained from his face. The desperation vanished, replaced by something feral and cornered. An officer cuffed him, pulling his wrists behind his back. "Bryce Ridgway, you are under arrest for attempted homicide." Tanya tried to bolt, but a deputy caught her before she made it 3 steps. "Mom, you're under arrest for conspiracy and attempted homicide." From the hallway, I heard hurried footsteps. Tessa. She had woken to the shouting. She appeared in the doorway, hair tousled, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her small voice cracking as she whispered. "Daddy?" Bryce twisted violently, eyes wild. "Mom set us up, that old witch. She poisoned you against us, Tessa." I pushed myself upright slowly. My hands still trembled, but my voice did not. "No, Bryce," I said quietly. "You set yourself up the day you decided my life was worth less than your comfort." He froze. For the first time, he looked at me as if he were truly seeing me, not the burden he had invented, not the obstacle he had cursed, but the mother he had chosen to destroy. Officers led him down the hallway. Tessa burst into tears, running into my arms. I held her tightly, my shoulder aching but my resolve stronger than it had ever been. The night they meant to end my life became the night their crimes finally began to surface. And I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. The courthouse in Portland felt nothing like the hospital corridors where I had spent most of my life. Yet the same tension filled the air, tight, sterile, and humming with unspoken fear. Reporters clustered outside the doors, murmuring phrases like attempted matricide and the Ridgway case, their cameras flashing each time another official walked by. I never imagined my name would be spoken with such morbid fascination, but then again, I never imagined my own child would try to kill me. Inside, the gallery was packed. Neighbors I barely knew, nurses from my old unit. Even the CPS worker, who had nearly been manipulated into removing Tessa from me, sat rigid in the second row. The judge entered, and suddenly all the whispers died. Bryce and Tanya were brought in last, shackled, wearing orange jumpsuits that did nothing to dull the hatred etched across their faces. Bryce refused to look at me. Tanya glared as though I had wronged her. The prosecution began with the simple, devastating truth. The evidence spoke louder than any testimony could. The attorney pressed play. On the first recording the conversation about overdosing me with insulin, Bryce's voice filled the room, cold and practical. One heavy dose. She crashes in her sleep. Then Tanya. Well, say she messed up her meds. Old people always do. A ripple of disgust spread through the room. Next came the texts messages I had read so many times that the words were burned into my mind. Once CPS sees the recordings, she's gone. After that, we take her house legally, for her own good. My stomach tightened as the attorney laid out each calculated step of their plan. The forged will, the doctored audio files meant to make me sound abusive, the script Tanya forced Tessa to practice while the child cried through every line. Then came the footage from the night they tried to kill me. The officers dimmed the lights slightly as the screen lit up. There, in grainy but unmistakable clarity, Bryce stood over my sleeping body with a syringe. His hand reached for my wrist, the needle lowered. The door burst open. It all played exactly as I had lived it. For a moment, even the judge looked rattled. When it was the defense's turn, the room shifted from horror to insult. Bryce's lawyer painted me as confused, unstable, an elderly woman prone to delusions. He insisted Bryce was overwhelmed by the burden of caregiving, that he was a man pushed beyond his limits, not a criminal. I sat still, fingers wrapped around my cane, trying not to let the humiliation seep into my bones. They wanted to rewrite my suffering as fantasy. They wanted the world to believe I had imagined the child I raised standing over me with a syringe. The prosecutor objected, and the judge sustained, but the damage of hearing it lingered like smoke. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand slowly, not to gain sympathy, but because age demands honesty. I held the railing, lifted my chin, and began. I spoke of raising Bryce alone after my husband died, of working double shifts, of walking miles with a feverish boy in my arms because we had no car and no money for a taxi. I spoke of his first insult, the moment he called me a burden, and how each wound afterward deepened until something inside me stopped trying to defend against it. I spoke of the moment I heard him teach my granddaughter to fear me. By the time I finished, tears had streaked across the faces of strangers in the gallery. Bryce, however, looked bored, as if what I said were nothing more than background noise. The judge leaned back, silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, the entire room leaned forward. He turned first to Bryce. "Your mother, Eleanor Ridgway, gave you life," he said, voice steady but heavy. "You repaid it with a calculated plan to end hers for money and convenience. This is not stress. This is not a lapse in judgment. This is moral bankruptcy and attempted murder." Bryce's jaw tightened, but he did not speak. Then the judge addressed Tanya. "You manipulated a child. You forged legal documents. You conspired to take a woman's home, her autonomy, and her life. Your cruelty was deliberate." The verdict came swift and unforgiving. Bryce Ridgway, guilty of attempted murder, fraud, and child endangerment. Tanya Ridgway, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, and witness tampering. The courtroom exhaled. Reporters scribbled furiously. And then Bryce snapped. He lunged forward, held back only by deputies, and shouted, "You should have helped us. You ruined our lives." His face was twisted with a rage I recognized too well. I rose slowly from my seat. Every bone in my body felt heavy, but my voice was lighter than it had been in years. "I helped you your whole life," I said. "You just never learned what real help looks like." Silence fell so completely I could hear the air move. Bryce's expression faltered. For the first time, I saw not hatred, not greed, just the hollow recognition of a man who had lost everything, including the ability to blame anyone else. The deputies pulled him away. His footsteps, shackled and stumbling, echoed off the courtroom walls as the doors closed behind him. And just like that, the weight of decades lifted. Justice had spoken, and I was still standing. The day CPS placed Tessa's small hand into mine, something inside my chest finally unclenched. The caseworker spoke gently, explaining temporary guardianship, upcoming evaluations, and the hoops we would need to jump through. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Tessa leaned against my hip and whispered, "Grandma, can we live somewhere Daddy never wanted?" Her little voice trembled with fear and hope woven together. I knew exactly what she meant. 2 weeks later, we stood on the porch of the old house in Cedar Hill, the house Bryce had once demanded I sign over. The house he saw as a shortcut to the life he never earned. It looked worn, weather-beaten, and stubbornly standing, much like I felt. The moment I turned the key and pushed the door open, the air inside greeted me with the scent of old wood and memory. Tessa skipped in first, her sneakers tapping against the floorboards that had held generations of Ridgways long before Bryce ever learned the meaning of greed. We spent the first few days dusting shelves, airing out rooms, and pulling weeds from the garden. Tessa watered the stubborn rose bush by the fence, declaring with dramatic flair that she would make it bloom again, even if it hates me. When I hung her drawings on the fridge, she hugged me tightly, as if claiming the house in her own small way. And when I brought out the old photograph of her grandfather, something Bryce had once forbidden me to display, she asked softly, "Grandma, is it okay if he watches over us now?" I felt my throat tighten, but I nodded. In the weeks that followed, the community surprised me. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and sympathy. A retired teacher down the road offered to tutor Tessa until things settled. People I barely knew from the courthouse mailed letters saying they were praying for us or thanking me for speaking out. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel invisible. I felt seen, not as a burden, not as a story Bryce twisted for convenience, but as a survivor. Then came the call from the insurance company. They wanted me to participate in a new awareness initiative about elder exploitation videos, pamphlets, community talks. The woman on the phone said, "Your courage will help protect countless seniors, Mrs. Ridgway." I almost laughed. Courage had never been the word I used for myself. Survival, maybe? Stubbornness? Absolutely. But courage? Maybe it fit more than I thought. I agreed to help not for recognition, but because I wished someone had told me, years ago, that abuse does not always come with fists. Sometimes it comes in the form of silence, entitlement, or a child's voice saying you cost too much. Frank visited often. He never knocked loudly, just a gentle tap on the frame before stepping inside with a bag of tools or a loaf of fresh bread. He fixed the leaky sink. He rewired the porch light. He taught Tessa how to sand an old dresser until it gleamed like new. Sometimes we talked over tea. Other times we simply sat on the porch in comfortable quiet. He never asked for details. I was not ready to give, and I never asked him to leave sooner than he wished. It was companionship born not of obligation, but of respect. Tessa adored him. She started calling him Uncle Frank, and he pretended not to smile every time she said it. I watched them plant marigolds together one afternoon and thought about how different life could have been if Bryce had grown into a man who valued kindness over convenience. But I refused to let bitterness consume me. Losing a son in the emotional sense is a wound that never fully closes, but some truths must be accepted for the sake of the living, I told myself. Some people must be held by the law, or they will destroy anyone who trusts them. And for the first time, I believed it without guilt. One sunny Saturday, Tessa and I painted a wooden sign to hang above the porch steps. The wood was old cedar, smooth after years of weathering. I carved the letters carefully, while Tessa handed me the paintbrush. Ridgway home not for sale, not for betrayers. When we hung it, she stepped back, hands on her hips, and said, "Now they'll know whose house this really is." I laughed, a real, full laugh I had not felt in years. Later, as she played in the yard, twirling through dandelions under the afternoon light, I sat on the porch and let the peace settle over me. The house, the garden, the breeze, they wrapped around me like a long-lost embrace. They wanted me gone so they could take this house, I whispered to no one, and everyone, but this house kept me alive long enough to watch justice find them. The wind rustled the leaves in agreement. I leaned back in the old rocking chair, listening to Tessa's laughter carry across the lawn. The sound was brighter than any verdict, sweeter than any moral victory. "For the rest of my life," I murmured, "I will not be silent again." No grandmother should ever be turned into a shadow inside her own story. The sun dipped toward the trees. Tessa called, "Grandma, come see my flowers." And I went to her, leaving the past where it belonged, in the courtroom where justice took root, and stepping fully into the life I chose to reclaim. Thank you, sweetheart, for staying with me through the end of this long, crooked road. Some stories bruise the heart before they heal it. Some truths sit in the dark for years, waiting for a single voice to say, enough. If this story meant something to you, if you believe no grandmother should have to fight for her life under her own roof, if you believe that justice, though slow, still has a pulse, then I would be honored, truly honored, if you'd stay a little longer with me. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Here, every scar becomes a chapter, every whisper becomes a warning. Every quiet woman finally gets her turn to speak and be heard. Your support keeps these stories alive. Stories of survival, of betrayal, of strength that grows in silence until the moment it refuses to break. Thank you for listening, my dear. And remember, when a grandmother speaks, the world ought to stop and listen. Come back soon. I have many more truths to tell you.